Welcome to Breathing with Beerman, the podcast. We haven't done one in a while. I try to wait until I get people I think are interesting, have good stories, and like to talk. And before I go on, I just want to say if you like what you hear today, you like the stories of these very interesting people from New Jersey, from around the world, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Adam Beerman, Breathing with Beerman. Today's guest is a Wall, New Jersey native. He was a star quarterback in high school, post grad at Hun. He went on to become an elite athlete who played D1 football at Northwestern and even pro football. Now he's an entrepreneur, leadership coach, among other things, and he's also he wrote a book called Cheerleader, inspired by his remarkable partnership with a man named Frankie. I hope I get the name right, Ken Evie, a nonverbal young man with cerebral palsy, who wanted to coach football. And we'll find out our guest gave him a chance. And they went on to lead the Peddie School in Hightstown, New Jersey, Walter Annenberg's big alma mater, to many small prep school championships and sent a lot of players to D1 schools in the NFL. Please welcome the amazing Chris Malleo. I keep on getting, I butcher names. That's my
You
problem.
got my name right, and Frankie's you're very close, Frankie Knievi, and I don't know how I'm going to live up to that introduction, Adam, but thank you
Uh,
so much.
it's all true. That's why I'm talking to you. First of all, I just want to say thanks for coming on. You have four kids. You're an entrepreneur. You're finance, and you're finding the time. I mean, how do you manage your own stress and time zone?
Oh man, a lot of early mornings and late nights. It's great. I have such a supportive family. My wife is incredible, and so she does a lot of the heavy lifting, when I'm not around. And so it's just about time management, and I just do the best that I can and prioritize things like this. This is something that's important to me, and so I invest my time. I don't spend my time, and I'm really, really careful about who I share it with. And this is, I want to do it with people that are important to me and that I think are making an impact not only in my world but in other people's worlds as well.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm kind of veering off. Being a leader, and we'll get into that as much time as we can. Probably won't cover everything. We can't do it justice. How do you manage when you get in that proverbial cranky bad mood?
Oh man, so unfortunately, I have a great mentor. His name's John Gordon, who's a fantastic author. He's a publisher of his company, Gordon Publishing, is publishes my book. And John Gordon has taught me a lot of things. One of which is just how to manage stress. And one of the things he has said over time to me, which I really appreciate and resonates a lot, and I think it'll resonate with a lot of your listeners, is you can listen to yourself. You don't always have to, or you can talk to yourself. You don't always have to listen to yourself. And so, and so when you get into those cranky moods, into those situations, sometimes it's because it's just you have negative self-talk. You just have to be careful what you listen to. I'm also incredibly intentional about just being grateful. I find things to be grateful for, right? And it's gratitude is, I think, is central in combating, stressors and depression and all those things. If you could find areas to be grateful, I think it'll solve a lot of problems.
No, it's true. Like shoot through it. If you just stop and think and be grounded, yeah, there's a lot of things to be thankful. And that's not being Pollyanna. I mean, come on. I
Right,
mean, it's pretty obvious to me. I
right.
mean, my dad, who's 94, he was born before they even had a social safety net. Roosevelt just became president. These
Mm,
people had to scrape by to eat. They only went to the
mm,
doctor when they were really sick. I mean, and
mm.
it could be even worse. Yes, I
Right.
agree. But we're segueing again. Um, Again, these questions are meant to be open-ended, kind of forensic. You've lived a lot of different lives. Um, and you've been in a lot of different worlds, in my opinion. You've been an elite athlete, so that's a lot of focus. You were at Wall Township, you went to Hun School, you became like a five-star recruit. I mean, you went to Northwestern. Most people, like it's a filter. Most people don't get that high. You had you had some ups and downs there, but you did play some pro sports. Then you became an entrepreneur and you went into finance. When you look back at all these chapters in your life, what were the turning points that you think most changed how you define success and failure and where you wanted to go? If that makes sense.
It
So,
does. It makes a lot of sense. It's a great question. I think life is such a fluid process, and I think that success, I think, is determined by where you are in what chapter of life. And so, when early on when I was just starting out my journey, whether it be entrepreneurial or coaching, it's like sometimes it's that first victory and that determines success and dictates success. And then what I found though over time, Adam, was success became less of something that was necessarily tangible for me and more kind of centrally focused on an attitude and approach. And so I had the pleasure of being at one point with John Maxwell, who's a famous leadership consultant and author. And John Maxwell, when I was at this event, said something I found fascinating, and it really changed my perspective on success. So what he said was he spent 30 years of his life trying to define what success meant to him. Because success can in many ways be a nebulous term. And so he spent a lot of time, was thoughtful, was introspective, and decided that in his version of success, his definition of success was that it was is when the people who know and love you the most also respect who know you the best, excuse me, love and respect you the most. And so that's so interesting, right? If you think about it, because so often we spend our lives trying to impress people who really don't have a direct impact on who we are or what we should be doing. And so from that, I tried to develop my own definition of success, which to me, success right now, and it has been this way for a long time, is consistency in my standards, my attitude, my behavior, my communication, and who I am as a husband and father, regardless of circumstance. And what I found was that circumstance is dictated by how I manage my standards, my attitude, my behavior, my attitude, my communication, all those things. And so in many ways, success for me really became about consistency and being who I knew I was born to be. And I knew once I got to that place, the results started to take care of themselves.
Interesting. You had a foundation and you kind of like initiated it and assimilated it into your brain, and then you just acted on that.
That's
So how
right.
does that fit into you basically birthed the Peddie School? I did some research and stuff. I grew up in this area, Princeton and everything.
Sure.
And Dave Dudek you
Yeah.
talked to him. Well, anyway, I grew up with his daughter, but you inherited a football team on life support,
Yep.
Peddie School, with probably a long tradition, lots of money. So how did you translate that? What were some tangible steps you took to start changing that program around?
Yeah, it's another great question. So, was number one was our standards. Really, we developed this incredible standard of accountability. And so we really put a huge focus on our standards and really not wavering on those. I think consistency, right? Going back to the word consistency, consistency in like what we were preaching and the standards that we were asking our players to uphold themselves to. That was, I think, fundamentally like number one, like first and foremost, the things that we had to fix and change slash improve on day one was improving that level of consistency and accountability. And then number two was, I think, just intentionality and like showing these players how we cared. Because it's one thing to hold them to a certain standard, but it's another really to invest in them as people. And once we started to do that, the results started to take care of themselves. It became incredible because what we had was people who were fully invested in the process. They believed in what we were asking them to do. It wasn't just a requirement at that point. And when you have belief and everyone rowing in the same direction, that's when magic happens.
Yeah, you said once, I'm not going to say it right. People know you care when you show that you care or something,
Yeah, so yeah, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
right? But you have to be authentic when you do it. They can smell a phony too.
They sure
But
can.
right.
Absolutely.
Well, were you telling your assistant coaches and yourself just catch them at the right time, tell them to doing well, be consistent, be tough love? Was it that kind of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, I think for sure. I think absolutely. We were all on the same page in regards to once again those standards. And so, from the from myself all the way down to the assistants to the water boys to the equipment managers, like everyone was held to a certain standard of excellence. And we had a saying at Petty, which I borrowed from Dabo Sweeney, which best is the standard. So like when people wanted to know, like, well, what is your actual standards of your program? It's just we're requiring your best at all times, and your best, Adam's best might be different than Chris's best. We're not asking Adam to be Chris. We're not asking Chris to be Adam, but we are asking you both to be at your best. And we knew when we could get everyone on the same page, whether it was coaches, equipment, players, whatever it might be, athletic director, that's where, the program would continue to accelerate and we would grow. And so, there was a level of consistency across leadership, across the coaching staff. And it started to resonate with the players. And once again, that accountability, it didn't just fall on the players. It also fell on the coaches. Like we created this great system and culture in which coaches were accountable to the players. Like players were allowed to call out their coaches,
Wow.
like, "Hey, like, what's going on here? Are you doing your best?" And if you answered yes, like, "Hey, that's great. You can honestly answer yes." But if not, then the question would be why. And so when players learned that they had as much ownership of the program as I did as the head coach or the assistants did, I think that empowered them, and that feeling of autonomy and that empowerment really helped us take it maybe would have been a 3 or 5 year process into a 1 or 2 year process.
Right. That's interesting though, because you can get a lot of some coaches, you might have the best intention. Some coaches don't want to be told stuff. I
For
mean,
sure.
old school.
For
But they
sure.
felt comfortable enough and you guys were consistent and fair enough. And then they didn't abuse it either. They didn't abuse
No,
that power.
no,
They only
definitely
talked
not.
when it was sincere and they felt something had to be said.
Absolutely. Yes, for sure.
Crazy.
Yep.
Great. So, but you were still tough. You're still a coach, still accountable. But they could say, hey, you shouldn't have talked that way to that kid today. A kid could say that to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I
Nope.
had an open door policy in which players could come to me with any questions, concerns, complaints, whatever it might be. But my thing was always this. You can come to me with an issue, but don't just come to me with the issue, also come to me with the solution.
Right.
Right. And so I used to say, don't be a problem stater, be a problem solver. And
Yeah.
so come to me if there's an issue, but let's solve that problem together. And I think that was a big piece of, the growth of our culture and our program.
But then, and again, you would be constantly fair and held to your standards. That could be a grind, though. You had to make sure everyone, at the end of the day, you're the head coach, too. You really had to be on people. Nick
Yeah, no
Saban
doubt.
said that was the hard, I mean, but he said one of the hardest things was he had to be, quote, badass, whatever that term, he always had to make sure you can't let up.
Right.
Yeah, he didn't let. That's why I remember when Alabama was beating, I think, Louisiana Lafayette by 55. It was a dumb mistake on offense. He let him have it. You thought it was
Absolutely.
the championship game. It's
Yeah,
kind
well,
of
the players see that. They understand that, right? And
right.
so and it might not seem like a big deal in the moment, but like those are small cracks. Those fractures could lead to like the shit that you essentially the culture can shatter because the second, one person sees that happening and they're like, okay, well, I don't have to be at my best consistently. It's only related to the circumstance or whatever's going on in the moment. Then that becomes problematic. And so we used to have a saying that we would talk about in the program, which really more of an equation, which we said E plus R equals O, which E meant the event is event. So events are going to constantly happen in life. They're going to happen in football, whatever it is. O is the outcome. So you have E plus R equals O. What really the differentiator amongst all that is the R, which is your response. So we're saying E is the event plus your response equals outcome. Too often in life, people think events happen and E equals O's. Events equals outcomes. It's not the reality. And so, that was something that we preached ad nauseum to our guys. And it was important for them to understand, like, hey, it doesn't matter whether you're playing and you're up 55 to nothing or whether it's a tight game or tie game. Like, the consistency in our standards and behaviors remain the same. And that was something that I think, certainly helped us as coaches is just to remain integrous in what we were teaching our guys.
Um, so and you treated all players the same. You had like four players who went to the NFL, 48 D1. But so when you recruited, what kind of player did you look for? Did you just some players did you, even though they were talented, did you say maybe it's not a right fit?
Yeah, I mean, there were plenty of guys who, didn't, I think, fit necessarily the box of what we were looking for and the type of athlete that we wanted. Number one that we really looked for was guys who were smart and tough. And so if you were smart and you had toughness, then we knew you had like a little bit of ability. We felt really confident that with our coaching, with our system, with our culture, that we could fix, whatever issues you might have. And so that was really, really important was that smartness, was being smart and tough. And I think with that, when you're smart and you're tough, you usually have a pretty good work ethic. For the most part, right? Most guys do. And so those are things that that fell into place. And of course, like, it's easy to say, hey, we want guys who are big, fast, strong, etc. But if you're building a culture and you're setting standards, you better have standards in the way that you recruit, right? Like how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so that was really important to us is to make sure that we recruited the type of athlete that fit the bill of what we were looking for culturally, and that could fit with the rest of the team because that was really important. One of the things I think that one of the reasons why we had such great success was because our culture was so strong and we had the right buy-in from the players.
Yeah, you had that player from Holy Cross who went to UNLV, but he was on your team, and you told his parents, "I'm starting this guy from Pottstown, PA, or wherever it was from."
Yeah. So we had a young man. He was, his name was Aiden McHugh, who was not nearly as talented as a young man, the young man you're referencing, Matt Sluka, who was named the Player of the Year, and was a fantastic quarter, continues to be a fantastic college quarterback. And Matt was not playing well in preseason camp, and we had just made a distinct decision that like Aiden was playing better than Matt. And although Aiden wasn't nearly as talented, big, fast, or strong, he had deserved to play. And that was part of it. Like as a coach, I can't preach that the best, if you perform the best, that you're going to be the starter, at your position, and then not hold true, let that not hold true, and if just because someone's more talented. And so
Right.
we went into that opening week of our undefeated season where we finished number one in the country, and I made a decision to start Aiden McHugh, who was really our third string quarterback. David Davis Warren was recovering from cancer, and we had Matt. And Matt's parents were upset, obviously, and they were saying like, "Hey, look, like, this isn't what we signed up for. We signed up for him to play quarterback." And I was like, "I understand, but he just wasn't better." And they had threatened obviously to make a move and to go somewhere else. And I was like, "Hey, that's your prerogative, but we're going to stick with this guy." And and we did. We stuck to our guns, and we had integrity in the process and the way we did things. And it ended up playing itself out over the course of the season where Matt ended up becoming the starter because he
Mhm.
just was that much better. But like early on, that wasn't the case, and he needed to earn it. And I do think the reason Matt became the player that he is today was because he was forced to go out and earn it and play better, and play in a motivated way. And that was reflected in him being the player of the year.
Well, that's walking the walk and talking the talk. That guy's, he's at James Madison, I think, and
Yep.
NIL. It's a whole
Yep.
nother story. But you knew obviously this guy was a D1 player, and the other guy, I think he's at Southern California now or something. I mean, he didn't
Yeah,
play college
yeah,
ball.
he didn't even play college football. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, you stuck to standards. So I was telling some people on the street, so I hope I get to everything. They said with your that amazing, you turned the culture in 4 years. You guys are like winning championships.
Yep.
And again, you were on life support.
Right.
Did you ever think about, did you get feelers to like join like a D1 staff or anything? Or like you're a miracle worker in a way. You've got to be honest.
Yeah, no, we did for sure. It definitely had a lot of interest, I think, at the collegiate level and then and a little bit beyond to continue coaching at higher levels. Really just for me, Adam, like what coaching came down to was just impacting lives in a positive way. And
Mhm.
just felt like Peddie was the right place to do that and had great relationships with my players and the community and of course Frankie and everybody involved in the process. And so it was just something that at the time wasn't right for me. To having, being a father, at the time my daughter was that was 6 years ago, 7 years ago. My daughter she had just, we had just had her. And so, have a newborn baby and all those things. So just my wife and I we were so invested in our family and what we had committed to as, to each other as a husband and wife and as parents that we just felt like it wasn't the right decision for us at that time.
Right.
So and it made sense, to stay and we did. And it was great.
Right. It's funny how your chapters, but you make concrete decisions based on the facts. You seem like a leader, though. There's a guy named Fred Greenstein, Princeton University. He wrote a famous book, Presidential Leadership. And what strikes me with you have that detached, you take out the facts from your brain, you put them there, you look at them, and then you make the decision holistically. To me, that's my observation from you, from just talking to you. Very concrete. I'm sure emotion's part of it because then you invest whatever emotionally. But now, what people have to know, and I still find this is amazing because I don't know if I would have hired Frankie Knivi. I don't think I would have had the patience just to deal with him hitting a keyboard trying to communicate with you, and that you would actually. I still don't get it. For those who don't know, I'm looking at the audience. He hired someone with cerebral palsy to be an assistant coach. And it took maybe, I'm thinking 5 hours to get 10 words out. I'm exaggerating. How did this happen?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, what an extraordinary true story. So Frankie applied for a job. I had an open coaching position available. He applied for the job through an email, and at the time I did not know that he was nonverbal, that he had cerebral palsy. And so, we had this really grandiose interview process, and we had a variety of candidates who had come through, and he was actually, believe it or not, the last candidate because he'd communicate with me last amongst all the candidates. And when the day came for him to interview, was really caught off guard, frankly. I mean, here he comes out in a wheelchair. He's got, he's drooling from the chin with a soft jaw. He's got his hands are clenched because of the spasming. His feet are velcroed into his wheelchair because they kick and spasm. And he has an affixed alphabet board on his wheelchair in which he kind of laboriously points to individual letters, and you have to read it manually over his shoulder.
Was this your first year coaching?
This was my second year. Yeah, my
Second year. So you're still kind of adopting the culture, and you might be
Yep.
not insecure, but you're still kind of new. You're trying to get,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, still trying to figure out, what I was trying to create, who I was as a leader. So it wasn't easy, and frankly, probably fairly risky on my part to make this
I
decision,
would think
but
so.
yeah, yeah. But Frankie just he was so authentic and his messaging and his communication with me, and although he maybe might not have been the most qualified football coach, I just felt like there was so much that he could offer, myself, the football team, our greater community, and there was just something special about him that just came right through, despite some of his limitations, some of his physical limitations. And so, although in the short term maybe there were better football coaches that I could have hired, I had to trust my gut to hire him. I did, and man, what a beautiful journey and blessing it was for me as a coach, for our players, and for Frankie and our community. And obviously now it's turned into a book that's impacting people all over the world.
Buy the book, The Cheerleader, at chrismalleo.com. Or go, it's on Google, it's on Amazon. It's a true story. But you weren't giving charity though. Did he make concrete contributions to the team? In what way?
Yeah,
What did he develop?
great observation, Adam. I mean, that was one of the things that was really important to me as the leader of our program, and that I think was really important for Frankie. And he discusses this in the book a little bit. Like I let him understand that really early on, that like, hey, we're not hiring you as a form of charity. Like we're holding you to a very particular standard, which we expect you to meet and slash exceed whenever possible. And Frankie, I think, said this early on in the book, that working with me slash for me was one of the best and hard most difficult things he's ever had to do.
Or imagine.
One of the best things he's ever had to do, because I was holding him to a standard that maybe a lot of people in his life hadn't held him to up to that point, because a lot of times people were just so essentially happy he was a part of the organization, not necessarily what he was bringing from a contributory standpoint. But then at the same time, what we the hard things, those were the great things, but the hard thing was like the standard that we held him to. And I pushed him. And I think a lot of, if you were observing myself and Frankie from the outside looking in, you'd be like, man, this coach is really tough on this guy. Which I was. The first scouting report he ever gave me, it was just not up to our standard. And I remember I basically took it and I threw it back on his wheelchair and I said, Frankie, like this isn't good enough. And frankly, if this is how you're going to give me scouting reports, like don't even bother. And I said, if I want you to view every scouting report you give me as though you're giving it to Nick Saban. I said, would you give this scouting report to Nick Saban? And he shook his head no. And I said, then don't give it to me. And
Wow.
and that was, I think, a really important moment for both of us, because we had established a lot of trust, I think, in that moment. Like he understood that I had a certain level of expectation for him. I needed him to do his job to the best of his ability for us to have a successful program. But also, I believed in him and I knew he could do better. And so I think that was really, really positive for him, because he received a sense of affirmation from me to say, like, hey, look, like you can and will do better. And I'm going to make sure that we hold you to that standard. And this isn't just some form of charity.
Yeah, he wasn't a mascot, and he
Right.
did make a contribution and stuff. And it must have been very hard for him. A lot of
Absolutely.
physical, yeah, mentally, physically, and everything.
Oh,
But
yeah.
he got better as the years went on though too. He did that practice notes. He did scouting reports.
Yeah, he did advanced scouting. He did post practice notes because he did such a great job with observation. He was also our JV offensive coordinator. We had actually created a picture board on his wheelchair so he could point to the plays that he'd wanted, and then we would get them signaled in. And so there was a lot of creativity in how we handled and managed a lot of the things that we did on game day, and just the level of contribution that we expected from him, and then in return what he gave back to the program.
And also, you pointed out, I think you said, empathetic listening. I think you said one. I did some looking at YouTube. Or other people told me a lot of times when you're talking, when you're listening, you're actually thinking about what you want to say next.
Right.
And someone like him, you don't do that. You really have to focus. And it's something we have to learn about actually listening to people with
Of
every choice.
course. Yeah. I mean, Frank, so, the average human, Adam, speaks about, I want to say between, like, the studies say, like 6 to 8,000 words a day. And so because of Frankie's disability, he has essentially the ability to communicate about 2 to 300. And so you think about how impactful those 2 to 300 words need to be because
Have to be.
he spends so much time listening. There's not a lot of room for fluff. And so it's really, really important that he's because he spends time listening, that you gave him the due respect of listening in return to what he had to say. And part of that was the intentionality of when you're reading, you're not thinking about the next thing you're going to say. You're just reading what he's saying and you're being present in that moment. And so
Right.
I think it really created this very authentic level of communication, between us.
Right. Um, I hate when I say it gotta go so fast. I don't know how fast you can answer this. I was talking to people in town, and they go, "Okay, he took Peddie. It's Peddie." I mean, Walter Annenberg, Life magazine, TV guide, and everything. And some of these people are very skeptical. They hear life coach, entrepreneur, and they just like roll their eyes. They think, "Oh, dime store," which is unfair though too. There's authentic life coaches out there. Anyway, they wanted me to ask, a public school program that football is on, it's on life support, maybe some social economic issues. They don't have the infrastructure per se. What advice would you, if you were a coach there, what would you give advice to a coach there? How would you, try to resurrect a
Yeah.
program?
I mean, what we did at Petty is completely feasible at any other program,
It's
truthfully. I mean,
transferable.
yeah, absolutely. 100%. Because I go back to it. It was about our standards and it was about, I think, the behavior and culture that we created. And so, if that were the case, Adam, then every single NFL team would win the Super Bowl every year, right? Like, it's like,
Right.
why is there 32 teams that play, but only one team wins? Like, you're talking about the most talented players in the world every single year. So it comes down to, I think, a lot of different factors, number one of which is culture and standards. And we were able to impact so many lives positively. I mean, look at, once again, I go back to accountability. Like, we made our players so incredibly accountable, and that was the way they handled themselves and cleaned up after themselves in the dining hall. If you were to ask one of our players to come on this podcast right now and say, "Hey, what was one thing that Coach Malleo, ingrained in your head all the time?" And they would say, "No one cleans up after Petty football." And that was whether it was in the dining hall, it was whether in the classroom, it was whether on the football field. Like, going back to our standards, our practice field was meticulous, both pre and post practice, because our players would pick up after themselves. There wasn't a cup of water on the ground. There wasn't a roll of tape on the ground because our players knew the standard. Because I believed that if we allowed them to get away with that, then they would get away with other things that were, more
Right.
important, frankly, when it came to winning. Right. And so, you look at our locker room and how they managed and handled themselves in the locker room and how the expectation of, like, how they were supposed to hang their helmets and place their cleats. And, like, some people might say, well, like, that seems silly. Well, was it silly that John Wooden was teaching his players how to put on their socks and tie their shoes?
Right. That's the first
I
thing he told them.
Absolutely. And why was that the first thing he told them? It was because he wanted to create the standard of, like, the little things matter. They are incredibly important.
Mhm.
And I think that those were things we did so often. I think people look at the magic that we created and they're like, oh, well, that was easy, right? And that's oftentimes the things that people say when things
Yeah.
go well, right? Like,
When
it's like,
I'm talking to people about you, yes, they instantly cut to that. Yes, it's pay, they threw some money at him and they wanted to win. And, there we go.
yeah, of course, of course. Well, I mean, once again, now, it's been 6 or 7 years since we've left, and Petty hasn't won more than two football games in a season since we've left.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying that to be disparaging towards the other coaches who have taken the job since we left, since our staff left. But, like, if it were that easy, they would have been winning before we got there, and they'd be
Yeah.
winning after we got there. So, what's the variable here? Obviously, we were doing something unique and different during our time there.
Especially with football, when you have to get 22 people with one heartbeat, 11, and then backups to come in and everything too.
Right.
No, I agree
Absolutely.
with you. I mean, what I said, I know some coaches in some rundown districts, but they were kind of like you. There was a culture, there was a standard, their players bought into it, and then they felt pride. They
Right.
felt accomplishment. Some of them were ego stuff. And then if you came on that team, you better fit into that culture. They made sure you did and stuff. And when that coach left, it's sad. Then things went like that. In
Absolutely.
Mercer County, I've seen that. Yeah, and I don't want to get too specific for not one with Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, they gave him everything,
Right.
everything. I know there's a lot of variables, but they gave him everything in a
Yeah.
state that's football mad. and he didn't
Absolutely.
get to 500. So
Yep.
something was amiss. There was just something
Absolutely.
amiss.
I mean, Brian Kelly just got fired. LSU just had the largest NIL budget in college football this last year.
Yeah.
They bought an entire roster, and Brian Kelly got fired. Why did he get fired? I mean, I don't want to speculate, but it's probably because he wasn't a great football coach and he didn't have a great culture.
Yeah, yeah,
Truthfully.
yeah. They didn't like it. Yeah, I
Right.
think you probably know more than I. My brother's in sports media. Kelly, yes. And also I think he got 34, the complacency set in about the money. He was getting
Yeah.
older. I'll walk. But anyway, God, we're going so fast. An amazing story. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Are you gonna be like Tony Robbins? I turn on my streaming channel. There's Tony Robbins,
Uh,
endlessly looping. I mean, you have a talent. I think you're heading in that direction. What do you want to be? What's going on?
Yeah, no, I enjoy speaking. I enjoy the coaching and leadership component of what I do. I'm fortunate that, I have some entrepreneurial pursuits that I'm, very successful in, and, commercial real estate being one of them. I love the work I do in commercial real estate, and actually have a tech platform that's rolling out here pretty soon. One of my clients is going to be Michigan State University. Pat Fitzgerald, who's about to get hired there, is going to be one of our first clients. It's called Culture Health. People can go on our check out what we're doing. It's called getculturehealth.com.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think we'll see. I mean, I love, Tony Robbins is someone who, inspires me. So I think, if I have the ability to inspire other people the way he's inspired me, then I'm certainly motivated by that. I think it's so hard for me to just predict exactly where I'm going to be. I mean, it's just merely 6, 7 years ago, I was coaching high school football, and now here I am today, and, have a company, a successful commercial real estate company. I've got, 4 kids, and I wrote a book. So who knows what the next.
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the place. I mean, in a way, it isn't, but it is. You could go in many different directions. I could see you being quite wealthy and and buying up. You could be at Mar-a-Lago eventually, or yeah, you might be, giving, or maybe doing both. I don't know. I don't. But
Yeah.
it's fascinating. Give me a shout out. How can people reach you? What are your websites? And if you can say really quickly too afterwards. What do you say to people like a Frankie, maybe who have been disenfranchised for whatever reason? This is going to be after you shout out your bona fides and do some PR for yourself, who might be disenfranchised mentally, physically, economically. I mean, in 1 minute, what would be your advice to them? But first, do your shout out. Let's
Yeah,
hear.
for sure. Thank you. Yeah, so if people want to reach out, they can reach me at chrismalleo.com. Yeah, there's an opportunity to engage with me. You can reach out and just, submit a contact form, and I promise you it will get someone will from my team will get in contact with me, and I will always respond. I always respond back. So happy to do that. If, anybody, regardless of what they need, if they need help, if they want to have me come speak, whatever, if they have a question, they want the book, fine. And then, as I mentioned, they could check out my website, getculturehealth.com, for our new tech platform. As far as, people who are disenfranchised, and unfortunately, there's probably more of them than that deserve to be right now, Adam. I think, like, one of the focuses for people is to understand and have hope. I think the world becomes incredibly difficult when there's no hope, and the more hope that we can give people, the better. And one of I think the greatest reasons why people should have hope is let there to be that sense of gratitude and positivity that things will get better. Like, there's so often circumstances are incredibly temporary, and I think if people really want to get down to the core of it, we have all survived 100% of the worst days of our lives, right? If we're living, breathing, talking, we've survived 100% of the worst days of our lives up to
Oh,
this,
that's for sure. Yeah,
right?
sure.
And
Yeah.
so think about that often, right? Like, just when it feels like it's the worst day of your life, when you can't breathe, when everything's just as bad as it could possibly get, remember that you've already survived. You have a 100% survival rate of the worst day of your life, and it will get better. And I think that can breed hope in itself. And the other thing too is there's more people out there that want to help than you could ever imagine. I think that's one of the things I've learned through this journey is, so often I think we try to go this alone when there are difficulties, and when people are facing, whether it's difficult circumstances or, tragedy or whatever it might be. Particularly men, we try to go this alone. And I think right now reaching out for help more than ever is probably essential. And so, people, if they do need help, or they do need, support, feel free to reach out to me for that. I want to
Right.
be a catalyst to help people and improve their lives.
And I think one thing you do is, well, I heard, how do we, a solution? People forget about that. It's easy to wallow. It's easy to stay in one place. You sometimes get so overwhelmed with your own troubles, bitterness, that you can there's a way to dig your way out. How do I you make a little plan? And like you were saying, and then you have resources you probably don't know.
Yeah, and one thing I think that, should certainly resonate with people, Adam, and that resonated with me is that, this references Frankie in the book, which is Frankie was born with cerebral palsy, right? That umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. Freak accident. He had it, none of his own doing. And so every day he wakes up, he has cerebral palsy. Every day he goes to bed, he's got cerebral palsy. There is no changing that circumstance. The only thing he can control is his attitude and approach towards life. And so, all of us have the ability to at least change our circumstance. But imagine now that we have the double power to not only change our circumstance, but also impact our circumstance positively with our attitude, our effort, our enthusiasm. So that in itself should be a catalyst for people to feel empowered and make change.
Well, with that, we have to end it. It's been too engrossing, too invigorating. And I mean, just for my media savantness, if you want to call it, you got star power, man. You got star power. Yeah. I look at you and I go, this guy has integrity. This guy's authentic. I can dig him. I
I
mean,
appreciate you. I
I'll
appreciate
buy
you.
stock in you. If you start, I'll buy stock. Thank you, Chris Malleo, and please come back anytime. And I appreciate you coming on.
Adam, thank you for having me. It's been a joy. I really appreciate it.